Hello yet again, folks. It is once more time for Creative Outlet Gaming Birthday Extravaganza episode 2, released every 2 weeks as it has been since the start here. And today I think we're going to do our second of the console, that's the word I'm looking for, console retrospectives that I've had planned for this. Now, the only console that had a whole retrospective dedicated solely to it was the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. The other four that we looked at, or that I looked at previously, that we're looking at now as far as it being released, came in pairs. So today we're going to be talking about the Nintendo 64 and the Nintendo GameCube. See, I found this pattern of it seems like a lot of Nintendo consoles seem to release in odd number years, specifically years ending in 1 and 6. Now, also, this is a rare year where a handheld also released in a year ending in 1. That would be the Game Boy Advance. That did not get covered in this episode. If there's anything I would want to do, if I were to do any bonusy things, it would be to go back and give the Game Boy Advance its due, because I do think that is a pretty major hole. I mean, I even talk about the Nintendo 3DS. That's going to be one of these intros I'm recording here tomorrow. But I did not talk about the GBA, and I think that's a shame. Maybe if I have some time, I'll do a little, there could be a little creative outlet bonus on the GBA. I guess absolute worst case scenario, I wait another 5 years, but that seems a little, a little silly. But today, at least, we're going to be talking about the Nintendo 64, originally released in 1996, and the Nintendo GameCube, also from 2001. We're going to be talking about a little bit of news here in this intro, things that have come up. There really isn't a ton for these, and that I don't think is too terribly surprising, because it doesn't seem like the homebrew and the fan work has really picked up a ton for the Nintendo 64. Like, it certainly started. You have your things like your Pico Interactive re-releases of games like 40 Winks, but there doesn't seem to be too terribly much. I talked about in the Zelda intro about some Ocarina of Time happenings, but again, outside of that, there isn't too much. In fact, I only have one piece of news here for the GameCube, and this is just a review on Nintendo Life about the Retrobit Prism HD, because that seems to be the only thing I've noticed that's really been happening with the GameCube in recent history, is that folks really want to get more, it's not composite, but it's RGB, if I remember correctly, ability for the GameCube to output in. There's a particular adapter. I can't think of what it's called. I don't think it is RGB, but it has red, green, and blue cables. GameCube cables. That people have just... There's one particular type of cable that's just far more expensive. Maybe it is composite, because I see these other ones. These are just the standard cables, the AV cables. It probably is composite, or maybe it's component. I don't know. I am blanking on my words. Yeah, I think it's the composite cables are the rare ones. I could be wrong. It could be component. It's really not that important. But the point is, it outputs far better than what the standard cables that came with the GameCube are. And what people are trying to get with the GameCube is an actual HDMI out. Some by literally modding an HDMI port into the system. Some by just a lot of these adapters, like I said, are coming out that you just plug your cables in, and then you plug the HDMI output into your TV. Or actually plug it into your input for HD. That just seems to be the one big thing that's happening with GameCube right now, and I guess that isn't too surprising, because it doesn't seem like there's much happening on the why can't I think of the word? The fan game and the homebrew front. Similarly, as far as the GameCube concerned, like I said, it seems to. I think the peak has already happened. I think we're starting to get on the decline. But GameCube games do seem to be the expensive game of choice at the moment. As far as like some games, like even Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door going for over $100. I could have bought a copy of it for, if I remember correctly, $130 at my local game shop. I was not going to do that. That game is not worth that much to me, even if it is considered the best of the Paper Mario games. And there are similar things happening with the Nintendo 64. There is the are adapters coming out for that system. There are new unique controllers coming out for the Nintendo 64 because the three-pronger isn't considered to be all that great of a controller. I can't blame people for thinking that, even though I think it is at least unique. But there are at least a couple of other stories that have come out in the last couple of months about the Nintendo 64 that will be worth sharing. Similarly, with the Ocarina of Time bit I talked about, there is also some news happening with GoldenEye 007, one of the few considered great licensed games, and of course it is a rareware title on the Nintendo 64, so I'm kind of obligated to really like it as a self-proclaimed rareware fan myself. But it seems like there's just a new record with a particular little trick in the Aztec level of GoldenEye, just with some item positioning causing boosts. Again, a lot of these speedrun improvements come from glitches, but that's just a little thing. So it's nice to see, again, more fan work, more, well, I guess this isn't really fan work, but just fans continuing to see what they can do with their games. As far as something that I haven't seen a ton of actually in the last few months is new discoveries. There were probably a couple of things I could have covered in the SNES episode relating to the Nintendo Giga Leak. Although I think I have more information from those coming out in the Wii and 3DS episode. There are some new Wii related findings coming out of the Giga Leak. But this bit of information isn't actually from the Giga Leak, but it just is apparently a Nintendo CD-ROM was found that was put up for auction, and it had some Earthbound 64 footage that we haven't seen. Of course, Earthbound 64 would end up becoming Mother 3 in the end, the Game Boy Advance. But man, I tell you, it would have been really interesting to see what Mother 3 would have been like on the Nintendo 64. I know there's nothing that can happen to actually make that game come to be, but man, it would be so cool if just a build of Mother 3 on the Nintendo 64 would come out and would just be leaked, because that would be earth-shattering, because that's a game that we never really got to see the light of day. There's so little footage, there's so little known about what that version of Mother 3 is like. And trust me, the Game Boy Advance version is fantastic. It is an amazing game. I haven't been able to play it yet, but I've of course watched a couple of playthroughs of it, and I would love to own even just the fan translation cartridge. But it's just that I think the Nintendo 64 version would just be that much like. There's just some aura about it. I get that same feeling when I look at Earthbound 64 that I got from seeing artwork and footage of Super Mario 64 for the first time. Of course, at the same time, then I'm also thinking, would I be disappointed with what Earthbound 64 would be like in the same sort of way that I'm kind of disappointed with Super Mario 64? I don't think so, because they're different, totally different genres. Mario 64 is a platformer, Earthbound 64 will be an RPG, so it should have tighter controls, at least on paper, and not have do or die sorts of things like you'd see in Super Mario 64, but I don't know. I could be wrong. As far as other Nintendo 64 things, I think I had one other thing that I wanted to talk about here, which is, this is part of a bigger issue that really I could spend a whole topic on, but apparently, in July, a sealed copy of Super Mario 64 sold for $1.56 million, which is just a couple days after apparently another record had been set. And really, this is just a smaller piece of a larger story that I don't have the information all compiled here to actually give a proper conversation about. In fact, I would rather save this for a later episode in the winter, or maybe in the spring, or worst case scenario next summer, whenever I'm able to really get back into doing COP related stuff. But this whole Heritage Auctions massive sales issue has turned into just a giant scandal with all sorts of weird and corrupt actions happening, and the creative outlet podcast. That's my show. The Completely Unnecessary podcast, which is the show that I wanted to actually reference here, has been doing some really good work talking about what all has been happening there. In fact, there's a whole new documentary by this person, Carl. I don't know if it's Jobst or Hopster, however he pronounces his name, but I would be very interested in viewing that to get a full-blown overview of what all seems to be happening. But this has been a long time coming because, I mean, Mario 64 is as old as the Nintendo 64, which granted, I mean, that is, 25 years old now? But compared to 35 years, talking 1986 when Legend of Zelda and Dragon Quest released, 10 years is a huge difference. Even any archaeologist will tell you, and I suppose that probably sounds like a weird thing to bring up, but in archaeology it's a big thing where it's like layers of dirt show like how old things are. I guess that might be more of a geology sort of thing, or a geosciences thing, but in the archaeological sense, it's like the dirt show how old things are, and 10 years is a lot of time, certainly for cultural reasons. Like there are probably far fewer full sealed copies of The Legend of Zelda in existence than there are of Super Mario 64, and that, in fact, there probably could still be shipping cases of sealed Super Mario 64s out there, and certainly there probably are some Dragon Warriors and Dragon Quests and The Legend of Zeldas that are still sitting sealed out there, but the number of those is going to be far fewer because there's another 10 years of those games being around to just happen to have, I don't need this sealed case of Legend of Zeldas anymore, so I'm just going to sell it off, or I'm going to unseal it and give them out to people just because I'm a cool guy or whatever. Whereas Super Mario 64, with those 10 fewer years on it, I have a hard time believing that you can't just find those sitting around. Plus, there was a pretty decent cultural change in 10 years where it's like, okay, now video games are a more established medium. Let's probably take a little bit more care and keep these sorts of things sitting around as opposed to just throwing them away. Certainly, there are a lot of Nintendo 64 game boxes that were just chucked just because they were still cardboard boxes, unlike PlayStation jewel cases and Sega Genesis plastic clamshell cases. But, that there was a change by the time the Nintendo 64 released, where, there's probably still a decent handful of Super Mario 64 sitting sealed out there. So there's no reason, even if Super Mario 64 is a fantastic game, even though I'm not a huge fan of it, and is like revolutionary and set the standards for 3D platforming and all sorts of 3D games, I don't know if it's quite gotten to the point where it is worth $1.5 million sealed, especially when if it isn't the best-selling Nintendo 64 game, it is got to be in the top 5. Let me look it up here. List of best-selling N64 games. So Super Mario 64 has to be either at the top or close to the top. Oh, wouldn't you know it? Number 1, Super Mario 64, the only game on the Nintendo 64 to sell over 10 million units at 11,910,000 units, only with Mario Kart 64 behind at second place and GoldenEye 007 third. The rest aren't important, but I'm just saying, there are 11 million Super Mario 64 cartridges out there, and I have a hard time believing there aren't at least, 10% of those still either complete in box or sealed out there. And, this is not even if it's a culturally super important video game to discuss and remember and analyze, I have a hard time believing that it's $1.5 million, especially with all of the scandals that heritage auctions and the WADA grading system seem to be going through. But, we don't need to get mired in controversy today. Like I said, I don't have a perfect grasp of the situation to feel like I'm doing a confident, super journalistic job there. But we're just here to celebrate these two consoles, look at my own personal experiences, talk about a lot of the games on the Nintendo 64 and the GameCube that I happen to own and have played over the years. Of course, there isn't going to be much of any footage outside of probably Super Mario 64, because I can't record much of anything else. Oh, and Super Mario Sunshine. I can't forget Super Mario Sunshine is also in Super Mario 3D All-Stars with footage gathering capabilities for me. So without further ado, I suppose it is time that we get started. Now, like I said, this and the Wii and the 3DS episodes are not following our standard format. In fact, this is just going to be a long overview of my experiences with these two consoles that lasts the entire episode. So we don't even really get into the futures, because again, the futures are pretty obvious. I kind of talked about sort of that stuff in this intro here, in fact, and I didn't have a special topic for these because I felt that the overviews and my own personal experiences could carry the whole episode. And lo and behold, they were able to go long enough to be full episode length as far as I'm concerned. So I think that means it's time for us to transition back into when I recorded this piece for everyone. Please enjoy if you're a fan of the Nintendo 64 or the GameCube today. So today I just kind of felt like doing a little bit of rambling about a couple of consoles. Well, I say rambling, it won't be entirely a ramble fest here, because I do have at least the games pulled up that I want to talk about for these particular two systems, which, yes, is indeed a little bit of a change from how I originally planned on doing this, but you probably already heard that in the intro anyway. Today we're going to be talking about the Nintendo 64, as well as the Nintendo GameCube. These are the older Nintendo consoles that are having anniversaries this year. In particular, the Nintendo 64 is turning 25 years old, which is absolutely insane to me. That 1996 is already 25 years ago, when I remember it being, I say this as if I actually remember it, when I remember it being only 4 years ago, though I was only really born 4 years after the Nintendo 64 released. And similarly, the GameCube is turning 20 years old, considering it released almost exactly 5 years after the Nintendo 64. Now, I'll be honest, I grew up with the Super Nintendo. My dad did the Super Nintendo. He had an NES when he was a kid, though there's a bit of a longer story for why he no longer has the NES from his childhood. That's really not important here. But suffice to say, I don't have that. So, and really after his college days and having me, he really didn't care much for playing video games outside of a later stint with the PlayStation 2 during the popularity of Guitar Hero. And even then, when he got into Guitar Hero, that was in that transitional period where the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3, and then, of course, the Wii, which we'll be talking about in a different episode, also released. So I never really got to have any sort of nostalgic connection with the Nintendo 64 or the Nintendo GameCube, but I ended up getting them later. Well, I ended up purchasing a Nintendo 64 later, or at least, I think it was a birthday present for my 13th, maybe 14th birthday, alongside Donkey Kong 64 and The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. As well as, I want to say, F-Zero X, but I'm getting a little bit off track there. We'll actually talk about these games in a little bit. And then similarly, for me, the GameCube was really just the Wii, because, of course, I received a Nintendo Wii for my 10th birthday, so that would have been just for sure barely when Wiis with GameCube support were still being produced. It was either my 10th birthday or my 9th birthday, but I'm all but convinced that it was my 10th birthday when I received the Wii. So, I'm in a bit of a weird place with these two consoles, because you would expect, at least with the GameCube, that there may be some sort of nostalgic connection for me, because you could surmise that being born in 2000, that my parents may have been interested in getting a GameCube or a PlayStation 2 or an Xbox sometime, even when I was a little guy, just because, they wanted something to do that wasn't watching TV on, just watching cable or watching movies. But really, my dad could just get by continuing to play the 20 or so Super Nintendo games that he had bought over his college years, mostly used for cheap, except for, of course, games probably like Super Mario World and The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. But we never really had that. And he never upgraded when he graduated in 1997 to a Nintendo 64 or a PlayStation or even a Sega Saturn. Of course, that would have been the least likely purchase for anyone regardless at that time period. So I came into the Nintendo 64 and the GameCube as a bit of an onlooker. A lot of my experience being exposed to the Nintendo 64 and the GameCube when I was young was basically through osmosis. It would be like I would go on to the, well, no, that's a little bit later. I remember when I was a child, if I can find a picture of this, that would, not necessarily a picture of me wearing this, but just a picture of this shirt, that would be amazing, but I doubt I'll find it. Of a shirt, a Mario shirt of like Mario through the ages, and it had like a NES sprite, Mario 2 sprite, probably a Mario 3 in a world, and then right in the middle was Super Mario 64's Mario model, right? And this is going up to, I want to say Super Mario Galaxy and maybe New Super Mario Brothers. I really don't know entirely for sure, because of course I had this shirt when I was like 7 or 8, and well, I'm nearly 21 now, so I don't really remember the contents of the shirt perfectly, but what I do distinctly remember was that model of Mario from Super Mario 64 in the middle, and thinking, man, that looks really good. That looks like really neat, and I'm really interested in that. But I had no idea what game that version of Mario was actually from. So, you fast forward a few years later, I get my first laptop in probably 2000 and I want to say 2012. I needed it for school-related projects, so it was not a purchase just for funsies. And I remember going on in my free time and going on, oh, there's a Super Mario wiki. What's this Super Mario 64? That's where that Mario's from, and learning, of course, all about like, oh, so there's all these consoles and these systems that I never really actually seen, and really learning about, okay, this is the Nintendo 64. Here are the games that came out on it, and really one of the things that nowadays folks kind of malign. Well, maybe they don't necessarily malign, but they look back on for some folks with fuzzy nostalgia goggles because that's what they grew up with. Some folks look on it with ire, and that they look at these renders as kind of ugly. But I actually always kind of thought that the pre-rendered aesthetic for models on or for artwork on the Nintendo 64 actually looked really good. And I mean that entirely unironically. Like, I look at I have the article for Super Mario 64 here pulled up, because we're gonna go through these games thematically. We're not gonna go just straight Nintendo 64, straight GameCube. We will go in chronological order, with the exception, of course, in this case of like, we're gonna go Super Mario 64, Super Mario Sunshine, just get the Mario games out of the way. Banjo Tooie, because that just kind of makes sense. But I'm getting in a slight digression in here. I remember seeing those images and thinking, man, that picture of like Metal Mario in the cave that they used on the cover of the Super Mario 64 soundtrack, that's a really good looking image. and I really like the aesthetic. You could even see that for me in like going even back into the Super Nintendo, looking at the artwork for Donkey Kong Country. Although obviously Donkey Kong Country 1 has the least impressive artwork of the whole group of country games. I always found them to look really good and really fascinating, and in that sense, I always found the Nintendo 64 to be this console that kind of eluded me and was one that I really wanted to get acquainted with, because I thought, foolishly I suppose, that if I think the pictures that are used for this look really good, well then the games themselves must be good. And of course, as we all know, I'm sure from experiencing some of being burned by game boxes and the like, that is not certainly the case. That is far from guaranteed that a game itself will be good just based on the box. And for me, that really describes how I feel about the Nintendo 64 in a nutshell. It's a console that I really want to like. It has games that I really want to like, but there's not a ton of games on it that truly I love. In fact, outside of probably the Game Boy and the Game Boy Color, I would contend that these two consoles that we're talking about today, they're probably the two systems that I've played the least. Maybe the NES is up there, but I've played enough games on it to feel like I have a pretty decent round of experience with it, despite not even owning one. And a lot of that is simply because the Nintendo 64 era, the fifth generation of consoles, is what I find to be the exact cutoff to where games were transitioning from being kind of, if you weren't really passionate about it, or if you weren't very knowledgeable, being very obtuse. Some Nintendo 64 games are still pretty obtuse. Of course, that comes back to that same problem that I would talk about in the Legend of Zelda episode with the Zelda 1 on the NES. You really need those outside materials for the games to make some more sense. And some Nintendo 64 games are like that. Not all of them, by far, fortunately, but certainly some games are like that still on the N64, in my estimation, where I find I want to play it for a little bit, and then I want to put it down because it's really not engaging me that much. And then the GameCube, I think, is the console that really fully completed the transition to what I would call the GameCube and the PlayStation 2 and the Xbox, and I suppose the Sega Dreamcast, to be the first generation of truly modern game consoles. Now, of course, soon here, if not already, they're going to be considered retro game consoles, which is still crazy to me. But to me, those sorts of games, even if I don't have a ton of fun with all of them, that era of games is the first era where I could feel comfortable, or I would feel comfortable receiving a manual with a game as a nice bonus, as something that I really don't need it to understand how to play the game necessarily, but it's nice to have, and it was still considered a standard thing to have at the time. Now, even then, I want to get into some depth on, the Nintendo 64 and the GameCube. Of course, the N64 was codenamed the Ultra 64 for a lot of its development. Of course, they ended up just dropping the Ultra, probably because of the Ultra Games trademark that was actually owned by Konami, so that they could publish more games on the NES than what Nintendo would arbitrarily allow them to do back in the day to ensure quality games, for better or worse. And the N64, man, that console should have been set up for success if Nintendo would just stop being so darn stubborn. of course, I'm referring to the fact that the games continued to be on cartridges despite the fact that clearly CD-ROMs were the future, the way that games would be released for, well, let's see, through the PlayStation 2, 3, 4, even on the PlayStation 5, we still use discs a good 25 years later. Of course, the Nintendo Switch reverted back to cartridges, but it isn't as much of a problem today thanks to how large flash media storage is. But if Nintendo just had gone ahead and made the N64 a real CD console, I could see history being very, very different in the gaming landscape. The Sony PlayStation might have been successful, or it might have been a little bit less. It might have stayed the same. It might have been a little bit less successful since Nintendo was already a household name as far as video games were concerned. Then again, maybe they could have made a foolish move in the same way that Sega did with their, I don't remember if the GD-ROMs or the Dreamcast or the Saturn. Of course, Sega had its own problems that Nintendo fortunately avoided, though then again, of course, there is the whole CDI and original PlayStation debacle, but that can be a separate story for another time. In fact, I feel like I've referenced this at some... Oh, no, I think I referenced it in the SNES episode, since that will probably be the first to have released. So you'll have probably heard about this already. But, it's just Nintendo kept, aside from the Game Boy and Game Boy Color lines of handhelds, and the Advance, obviously, eventually, each console kept selling fewer and fewer units. NES sold like 80 million units. Super Nintendo cut that down to 40 million units. Nintendo 64 were dropping down into the 20-30 million unit range. Well, let me look at the numbers just to make sure that I'm absolutely citing this correctly. I don't want to be reporting very false information here. I just need to find the exact amount of units sold here. Let's see. Units sold. Okay, 32 million worldwide. So, but even then, that's still 10 million fewer units, give or take, than the SNES had, which sold still a respectable 49, so nearly 50 million units, compared to the N64 only selling just barely over, I just saw it on here, just barely over 30 million. And then, of course, then you have the PlayStation 2 compared to the GameCube, where the GameCube sold 21.74 million units, while the PlayStation 2 sold, let's see, about 155 million units worldwide, so there was no competition. And it's because with the GameCube, sort of interweaving these stories together, kind of getting that rambling thing I was talking about, the GameCube repeated some key mistakes from the Nintendo 64. Most importantly, it didn't use cartridges, but instead of using full CD-ROMs or full DVD-ROMs, the GameCube used mini CDs, which certainly, mini CDs are cute and all, but, or mini DVDs, are cute and all, but they're literally smaller, so they cannot hold as much content as a full-size DVD or CD. So once again, if you're a developer, right, back in the mid to late 90s, and you're choosing, do I want to develop a Nintendo 64 game or a PlayStation game? You almost always choose the PlayStation, because the PlayStation is owned by more people, CDs are way cheaper to produce than cartridges, and since they're not a proprietary sort of medium, you don't have to specially I'm sure there was some special contract thing you had to do with Sony to get PlayStation discs specifically, but again, it comes back to that cost. The cost of doing that compared to the cost of ordering cartridges is way less expensive. Now, granted, obviously CDs have their own problems. The cartridges are just way beefier as far as they hold up better than CDs do. CDs are the weak media, and of course CDs are subject to disc rot along the way. Not that cartridges can't be harmed, of course, either. But, it's hard to justify wanting to release a game on the Nintendo 64 unless you're Nintendo. And you can kind of see that in the library sizes. Compared the Super Nintendo to the Nintendo 64, it's night and day game library sizes. Let's see. I don't have the exact number in front of me, but you're talking about a good maybe 700 games on the Nintendo 64 compared to a good 1,000 or so for the SNES. I can double check that just to be safe here, but certainly the number of games was significantly lower than what had been on prior consoles, and obviously that hurt Nintendo because they want to sell more games, so you want to have as many games as possible. Okay, now I am apparently way off. According to this article, there were not even 400 games released for the Nintendo 64 compared to over 1,000 for the PlayStation. I must be getting some numbers confused in my head here as far as the SNES, and admittedly I'm just kind of looking at this on Wikipedia, but I don't need to have super amazing specific articles here. This isn't a this is not by any stretch of the imagination a completely journalistic show. Okay, 1757 games are officially released for the SNES. Of course, only 700 or so in North America. That's probably where I'm getting the number confused here. But regardless, that is a massive drop in the number of games released on a system, and a lot of it can be chalked up to using that particular form of media, especially because in theory you would think you would want to develop for, if the Nintendo 64 had used only CDs, in theory that's the console you want to develop for first because it's the most powerful, and then you can just tweak the games for the PlayStation and Saturn later on, if you even make ports for those systems, to make the games run better on it. But because the Nintendo 64 used cartridges, maybe it wasn't worth developing for the N64 in the first place. And of course, that's not to say that the Nintendo 64 didn't do anything revolutionary. Of course, it made 4-player multiplayer gaming a standard on consoles, as the Nintendo 64 had 4 controller ports built into the system, whereas on the PlayStation, you would need to purchase a multi-tap like you had to do for the SNES for, say, Bomberman. And of course, that the Nintendo 64 introduced Rumble with the Rumble Pack, that Sony would end up copying on the PlayStation when they later released the DualShock with the dual sticks, and then the Rumble in the DualShock, as opposed to the regular plain Jane PlayStation controller. That was basically just a Super Nintendo controller with some grips on the bottom and different symbols. And as far as other aspects, of course, we can't talk about the Nintendo 64 without discussing the Nintendo 64 disk drive, which never even made it out of Japan and hardly had any good games. It's really a shame, because that could have been something very good if it just hadn't gone through development hell. Hell, it would be interesting, speaking of development hell, to have just the F-Zero X track editor available here and see what all additions could have been made to F-Zero X here just by having that. But alas, it appears it was not meant to be, to have the DD be a fully successful device. And again, you see similar things happen with the GameCube. But the GameCube still did really good things. People make fun of the fact that the GameCube had a handle, but yeah, it was kind of the smallest console of the time, and thus made it very easy to be once again, the party console. In that sense, I suppose the Nintendo 64 and the GameCube are almost destined to be worse-selling systems, in that if it's going to be the party console, only one person really needs to own them to let 4 people play. You don't need to have another system or some sort of accessory to sell more units. But I digress. Maybe that point isn't fully there, since you could argue that having a system as the party console makes it so that folks, when they don't have their friend around, want to buy a system for their parties. But I'm getting way off track here. Of course, the GameCube also had its own fair share of very good accessories. People talk about how amazing the GameCube controller is, and of course, the Nintendo 64 was the only console at launch to come standard with an analog stick, which of course is why the PlayStation ended up adding an analog stick to a pair to the DualShock, since they decided that two would be necessary, and indeed it was. We see how amazing dual analog controls are today, having at least one for camera control and one for movement for 3D games. Whereas the Nintendo 64 only ever had the C camera control buttons for games like Super Mario 64. And then the Sega Saturn had its analog controller inspired by the N64. As far as the GameCube, again, it's considered a revolutionary controller. People, for as weird and strange as it looks, there's a reason it's still considered the ultimate Smash Brothers controller, because it's a very comfortable controller. I can't say I love it in the same way that a lot of folks seem to just gush over the N64 controller, the GameCube controller. People don't gush over the very awkward three-pronged N64 controller. No. But, the GameCube controller is a fine controller. I can't act like it's terrible, or I just think it's a serviceable controller. And then, of course, you have accessories like the Game Boy player. The Nintendo 64 famously did not have some way of playing Game Boy hardware or Game Boy games on the TV, although there was the Wide Boy 64, but that was only really for the press and for development units. Whereas the Super Nintendo commercially had the Super Game Boy to play Game Boy games using your Super Nintendo on the TV. And the GameCube, now you could play Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance games on the TV using the Game Boy player, as long as you still had the included boot-up disc. Yeah, that's always the hard part, is making sure you have the boot-up disc. In fact, that's probably the more expensive item rather than just the Game Boy player itself. But otherwise, the GameCube tried to do things like having LAN play. Of course, we're going to talk about that a little bit with Mario Kart Double Dash, though I did not get to experience that at all. But it could have done some interesting features if Nintendo had just, again, adopted some pretty common technologies, or just went a little bit more. I would describe it almost as going with the gaming flow earlier on. And of course, we still see that happen today. This sort of mindset that started with the Nintendo 64 of just saying, no, we want to do something our own way, come back to sometimes be revolutionary, in the case of the Wii, and sometimes be problematic, as in the case of, Nintendo's commonly poor online infrastructure. But I think I've given enough of a general overview of the consoles here. Of course, this episode, as well as the Wii and 3DS episode, are the only two in this gaming birthday extravaganza that will not have segments released, as I'm just doing this as one giant. We're not doing our other topics in this. We're not doing a future, because the future for all four of these consoles is pretty clear. We're talking about improving emulation, potential homebrew coming out for these systems in the future, and any fan work. It's kind of obvious in my estimation what the future of the 64, the GameCube, the Wii, and the Nintendo 3DS are at this point. There's really nothing. It's kind of a repeat of what I would have said, of what I said in the SNES episode. So I don't feel it's necessary to go over here, and I don't really have a special topic, because I would rather go a little bit more in depth on some of the games. Much like the Sonic episode, we have a lot of ground to cover. So let's just get started here with Super Mario 64 and Super Mario Sunshine. Possibly the only two games, other than, depending on how funky I want to be with incorporating certain footage from different games, potentially the only two games here that I will actually have straight direct footage for. And I don't remember how much I talked about these games in Super Mario 3D All-Stars, or when I talked about that a while back last September of 2020. But Super Mario 64, I never actually owned a Nintendo 64 copy of this game. I still don't even have a cartridge of Super Mario 64 on the N64. I always played Super Mario 64 on the Nintendo DS. And frankly, I still consider that version to be the superior version. Certainly, the original Super Mario 64 is a revolutionary game, but oh man, oh man, it is aged, especially those camera controls and those analog stick controls. When people say, like, I don't know if when I'm playing this, if I need to turn Mario around, is he going to do a 180, like a movement, just instantly snap to where I want him to go? Or is he going to walk around in a circle? I had that problem happen to me many times throughout the game, and there are so many pits that I could have just not fallen in if Super Mario 64 had superior controls. Then again, it was the first 3D Mario game, arguably. Well, it was one of the first major 3D platformers. Of course, you had Crash Bandicoot come out the same year, and you had games like Jumping Flash on the PlayStation already out, and then Bubsy 3D was already in production too. Oh, that game. I haven't played it, but I know it's real bad. Coming out in a generally similar time frame, though I think it was later than Super Mario 64. But man, as much as I really want to love the N64 version, I just can't for these exact reasons, because the controls are just so awkward and weird, and certainly just exploding with potential for growth. But at the same time, I also can't just act like, Super Mario 64 is bad. It's an iconic game for a reason. All of the levels, super memorable. The game is super colorful. I wouldn't say Super Mario 64 has my favorite Mario soundtrack. I actually don't even really have a favorite Mario soundtrack, to be honest. I just find that there's a lot of very select, amazing songs in every Mario game. But, I find certain Super Mario 64 songs to be sublime, particularly Dire Dire Docks, which is just the song that's used in water levels, not just Dire Dire Docks. It's also used in Jolly Roger Bay in particular, and the aquarium level, that Secret Star, if I remember correctly. But interestingly, when you think about the soundtrack, perhaps, I don't know if this is actually a really and truly popular song, or if Nintendo just wants to keep pushing it on us as if it's this popular, amazing song, but I actually find the slide theme to be really, really grating and very, very just bad. I don't think it's a very good song. It could have been a good song. I remember when I first played Super Mario 64, or on the DS, I should say, that was one of my favorite songs, but having listened to it so many times, I don't find it that amazing anymore. And I guess I should get into, how is the DS version different? Well, or why is it the superior version? Well, 4 times the characters. You don't just have Mario, you also can play as Yoshi and Luigi and Wario. Now, granted, some of their abilities are less useful. Wario's kind of a useless character outside of being able to punch the black brick boxes. He doesn't have a ton of use because he's the slowest and he swims the slowest and he can't jump very high. And then Luigi has his famous backflip where once he backflips, he also twirls in the air and basically breaks a whole ton of the level design, for better or worse. It kind of ruins the challenge. And then there's the famous problem that you're taking a game that was supposed to be the demonstration for analog movement. If I look at this new Nintendo 2DS XL here I have in my hands, a game that obviously this only has a circle pad, but it's effectively a control stick that is famous for showing how amazing the control stick is and mapping it exclusively to a directional pad. The exact control method that Nintendo basically wanted to eschew on the Nintendo 64. But if I'm going to be honest, I think people greatly exaggerate how bad the controls in Super Mario 64 DS are. But again, that also could just come down to the fact that I'm more used to that version, and I can't deny that I certainly probably have some nostalgia bias for the DS version, while there are similarly folks who have probably a ton of nostalgia bias for the Nintendo 64 version. I don't know. I think Super Mario 64 is a revolutionary game, but the DS version usurps it in such a way that I really wouldn't want to go back to the Nintendo 64 version, especially because the exact reason I would want to go back to it, that being the analog controls, really aren't that good anyway. So I don't know if I would really and truly get that much better of an experience playing it on the Nintendo 64. As always, when it comes to me talking about these games, none of these retrospective discussions are really true discussions that I would want to give. I always recommend folks look at full-blown reviews of these games, whether it be from folks like Exoparadigm Gamer, Some Call Me Johnny, because they make good work on these games, and they can give you even more depth than I could give. But please, that doesn't mean you should just leave here. I think they can give even better games, or better reviews. And then there's Super Mario Sunshine, the other 3D Mario game we're going to talk about today. And out of all the 3D Mario games, Super Mario 64, Sunshine, Galaxy, Galaxy 2, 3D Land, 3D World, Odyssey, I don't think I'm missing any in here. Super Mario Sunshine is by far the game that I have touched the least. And it's not even because it's inherently a bad game, although I do think it is a very flawed game, and a lot of reviews go on and talk about why it's a very flawed game. Especially those blue coins, how you have to collect 120 of those on top of obviously getting 120 shines, and some of the logistics as far as like, oh, you have these these tanukis holding on to these shine sprites when Mario is trying to collect the shine sprites, and how's that not illegal? That's ridiculous. Of course, the plot... Actually, you know what? The plot I like in that it's not entirely a traditional Mario plot. At least it doesn't turn into Bowser kidnaps Peach until a little, probably under a quarter of the way through the game. Although it certainly has its flaws as far as like, well, people can see that Mario has not always been on Delfino, or Isle Delfino. Why is he being prosecuted for this crime? And Mario certainly doesn't have a good defense because he doesn't have an attorney. Dumb. He tries to use Princess Peach as his attorney, basically. Yeah, I mean, the story is flawed and campy, but I honestly like, first off, just having a different sort of story, and certainly I'm a sucker for the voice acting in Super Mario Sunshine. Like, it's not very good, but it's just a nice change of pace. People had talked about all the way up until Breath of the Wild how Zelda needed voice acting. I genuinely think it would be interesting in the next 3D Mario game, or even the next 2D Mario game, even though they don't have a ton of story, to actually have the actors voice the dialogue with words, rather than just having us read it. Again, Zelda's a game that needs it more than Mario does, but it would just be a fun change of pace. And I think, for sure, at least as an experiment, Super Mario Sunshine was a great time to try it. Frequently, people talk about how Super Mario Sunshine is very samey. And I've watched a lot of playthroughs of Super Mario Sunshine, but I've never really fully beaten it. And to an extent, I can agree. I can, like, all the levels are, to one extent or another, tropical or beach levels. But I don't really care. It all works as a cohesive theme, and I think that is all that really matters in the grand scheme of things, is that Super Mario Sunshine is going out there and saying, this is a vacation-themed game, so we're going to put you in tropical areas. We're going to put you in a tropical little village. We're going to put you in a beautiful, pristine ocean harbor. We're going to put you at a theme park. Like, yeah, not all the levels are actually beach levels. And I think that Super Mario Sunshine does what it can with the theme. But of course, I can understand why folks may have wanted a slightly more environmentally diverse game going on to the GameCube, comparing, like, there's literally no snow level in the game. And granted, of course, that means you don't have ice physics, which is great, but Uh, it still would have been fun to see what sort of graphical capabilities the GameCube could have had with that. And honestly, one of the elements of Super Mario Sunshine that I find praised the most is one of the aspects that I like the least, and that's the controls. And honestly, that comes to one of the other major flaws on Super Mario Sunshine, which it's obvious that the game was rushed. Certainly, it's certainly true, because there are a lot of red coin missions in places where you could have a regular, different sort of mission. There are way fewer levels than there are in Super Mario 64. And really the big one, and the reason that I can't say I actually love the controls, Super Mario Sunshine is very glitchy. It is a game that you can break in half if you're a speedrunner, which, I mean, granted, is great for speedrunners, but if you just want to play the game like normal, right, having the super twitchy controls, in my opinion, actually hurts the game. I prefer the slower paced controls of Super Mario Galaxy, though I will contend that Super Mario Odyssey has the best 3D Mario controls in any 3D Mario game. But I can see the appeal of Super Mario Sunshine's controls. I think that with a little bit more time and a little bit more effort, the controls could have still been just as twitchy and still feel good to a lot of people. But I just wish it was the slightest bit slower, which I actually think is really interesting, because normally my complaint with a lot of controls, or especially in a lot of platforms, is I just want the characters to move faster. But Super Mario Sunshine is a game where I want Mario to move slower. And this is probably the only Mario game that I think is too fast. Of course, I haven't talked about, I'm staring at the box art here. I haven't talked about the most important aspect that perhaps defines Super Mario Sunshine's identity, and that's FLUDD. FLUDD, known as the full name Flash Liquidizer Ultra Dousing Device, is a water pack that Mario wears on his back throughout the game. Whether he can just shoot water above head with, or uses a jetpack, or uses a rocket, or uses a super duper duper speedy burst of speed. And I think it was a fun experiment for one game, but I'm glad it didn't come back. Certainly I would be interested to see, like, in a future 3D Mario game, like, you could have a FLUDD level, but I would not want FLUDD to come back as a full-blown gameplay, like the full extent of the gameplay. And I think FLUDD gives Super Mario Sunshine a unique identity that it needs, but I also don't know if that was really the best idea that could have been thought up at the time. Like, Super Mario Galaxy sent Mario into space. But the gimmick there was having anti-gravity elements, having planet hopping, where you could really, quite literally, run around a whole planet. Super Mario Sunshine takes flat levels like you would see, well, not flat, but, not gravity bending levels like you would see in Super Mario 64, and says shoot water at things and use this device as a crutch to get across gaps and shoot up to places, potentially. And I don't know, I think the idea of spraying and cleaning up all of this graffiti is interesting, but it's so experimental and so strange that was the gameplay gimmick, I guess, for the second 3D Mario game. Like, sometimes I wonder, like, would it actually have been better to just have a standard 3D Mario game on the GameCube as opposed to Super Mario Sunshine? Or, could it have been interesting to have Super Mario Sunshine be a second 3D platformer on the GameCube alongside a traditional Mario game? Since people could, if they really wanted to, go back to their Super Mario 64 2, so to speak, on the GameCube. But alas, what we got was Super Mario Sunshine. And, the game was critically praised for the time. People don't fully see it in the same way anymore. And even then, back in the day, I think fans still kind of saw Super Mario Sunshine still as sort of a black sheep in the Mario series. But I can't act like it's a bad game, I just think it's a misunderstood game that I don't think will ever really hit the highs that it could possibly have. So let's move on to a different series. We're going to do a little pair of games here. Banjo-Kazooie and Banjo-Tooie, and it's very appropriate. We have like 4 Rareware games in a row, but I think after that, we're done talking about Rare. This is my whole Rare experience with the Nintendo 64. Banjo-Kazooie, man. I look at a game, people look at Super Mario Odyssey, and obviously Nintendo says it's the first true core successor it's the first core successor that's fully inspired by Super Mario 64. And a lot of people rightly say, nah, Odyssey isn't inspired by 64. I mean, obviously it kind of has to be because Banjo-Kazooie here is inspired by Super Mario 64, but Super Mario Odyssey takes way more from Banjo-Kazooie than it does from Super Mario 64. And of course, Super Mario Odyssey just takes things from Mario in general. But the big thing, that the most major innovation that you saw in Banjo-Kazooie compared to Super Mario 64 is you could complete the whole level in one go if you really tried, except for a little bit of backtracking. And then Banjo-Tooie came along, which would have been the next game we're going to talk about, that I'm just going to talk about here, and kind of messed things up by making there be a lot of backtracking. Now, I've only really played Banjo-Kazooie, but I've heard enough critique of Banjo-Tooie to kind of know its general flaws. Banjo-Kazooie, I tell ya, to me, this should have been the Donkey Kong countries of the Nintendo 64. These are slightly more challenging games. They are bigger games with a lot more stuff to do, not unlike how Donkey Kong Country had a lot more stuff to do compared to Super Mario World. Of course, Donkey Kong 64 came along and kind of was the logical end conclusion of that, and in that Donkey Kong 64 has the Guinness World Record for the greatest quantity of collectibles in a 3D platforming game. But Banjo-Kazooie, I wish I could really put into words why it is a truly significant series. Certainly, it is a significant series. It took 3D platformers it really truly established what the collectathon was, and man, Banjo-Kazooie, what do I say about my own experiences with it? Banjo-Kazooie was a birthday gift, and I was very excited to play it because I really did enjoy 3D platformers like Super Mario 64, Sunshine, and Galaxy. At the time, if I remember correctly, Super Mario 3D World was the latest Mario game. And as much as I think Super Mario 3D Land and 3D World are good games, I would rather play a 3D platformer more in the direction of Banjo-Kazooie. And that is why I find the series exciting to me. I like the idea of being able to go into a small and contained world, which is why I don't like open world games, because they're not small and contained, and being able to just find everything in it, complete all the missions, and move on to the next one to continue my day. And Banjo-Kazooie is the perfect game to allow that, because unlike Super Mario 64, where you have to go back and forth for each mission, in Banjo-Kazooie, you can do whatever mission you want in whatever order you want and just get everything done in as close to one go as possible. Now, certainly, Banjo-Kazooie, the original, has its own flaws. I come back to the note system in the game. So, as opposed to coins, you collect notes in Banjo-Kazooie. But man, if you die, you lose all of your notes and have to go collect all 100 individual notes again, which has happened to me a couple of times and is really irritating. Fortunately, that little problem was fixed in the Xbox 360 re-release of Banjo-Kazooie. And in Banjo-Tooie, your notes were also saved and replaced instead with 5-note nests of notes rather than individual notes throughout the stage. But really, Banjo-Kazooie to me is kind of like the only really major collectathon 3D platforming mascot game that isn't Mario. You know, I remember it was either last year or 2 years ago watching all of Nitro Rad's obscure Nintendo 64 platformer videos, whether you're talking about the Starshot Space Circus Acrobat, I can't remember the exact name of the game, that video, or if you're talking about Rocket Robot on Wheels. All of those games are inspired in some way by Banjo-Kazooie here. But Banjo-Kazooie and arguably Conker, since that's the next thing we're going to talk about, those are really the only collectathon mascots that really took off. Mario and Banjo. And, you know, in that sense, I have to respect Banjo for being such a great inspiration for so many developers. But, you know, was it really that amazing of a game? I can't say I've actually really gone back to Banjo-Kazooie very much. And a lot of that comes down to how little gets saved. Like, it's just especially those stupid notes. If I could go into the level and get a few notes and get a couple jiggies and save my game and come back to the rest of the level another day, I think I would enjoy the game a lot more. And then the same holds true for Banjo-Tooie. But Banjo-Tooie is just a way bigger game. And of course, as much as I love Rareware, right? One of their developing flaws was, ironically, taking too much advantage of game hardware. You know, oh my goodness, I am going to butcher the name of the level in Banjo-Tooie. It is the volcano / ice world in Banjo-Tooie. What is the name? It's really going to bug me. It's not Cloud Cuckoo Land, because obviously that would be the cloud level. It's not Mayahem Temple, because that would be the sort of like temple-themed level. But it's the second to last world in the game. And that world, man, it chugs. That game chugs when it is playing. I have the article pulled up here. I swear I'm going to name the level. If I can just pull it up here. It's not Jolly Roger's Lagoon. It is... Where did it go? Not Cauldron Keep. Not Mayhem Temple. There it is. Hailfire Peaks. Banjo-Kazooie chugs during that, or Banjo-Tooie chugs during that level because Rare created such, detailed textures for the time that the Nintendo 64 couldn't render the game at its full frame rate. And, you know, I'm not one to be like, graphics need to be amazing, and I'm not even one to say that every game needs to be at 60 FPS, but man, I need to have a consistent frame rate in my games to fully get enjoyment out of it. And obviously I want to finish Banjo-Kazooie before I play Banjo-Tooie, but that is certainly a piece of the puzzle that I'm not looking forward to playing when I eventually decide to pop in Banjo-Tooie. I mean, and maybe I'll just play Banjo-Kazooie and Tooie via the Rare Replay on Xbox One, just because I'd really rather play the game in HD anyway with a consistent frame rate. Although at the same time, it's also just like, man, but I really want to play it Banjo-Kazooie the way it was meant to be played on a Nintendo 64 with a Nintendo 64 controller, but I can't win with it, man. Neither can I win with the next Rareware game here, Conker's Bad Fur Day, the only M-rated title we're really going to be talking about here today. And Conker's Bad Fur Day is a game that I really want to play, that I've seen a couple playthroughs for, and every time I'm just like, man, I really want to play that game, but I don't want to spend $80 on it. I know, I'll play it on the Rare Replay. And even still, even 5 years into the Nintendo 64's lifespan. So also, I guess, happy, why can't I think? 20th anniversary to Conker's Bad Fur Day, as of March and April, depending on which part of the world you're in. The controls in Conker still have the same sort of flaws that Banjo-Kazooie and Super Mario 64 have, and that they're not fully tight enough yet. Again, I don't think 3D platforming really got fully tight controls until midway through the 6th generation. And that's a bit of a shame, because I think there was a lot of potential in the Nintendo 64 era, especially the game like Conker's Bad Fur Day. It's really the game that had a lot of writing in it that could have just written itself, to be honest. Because, Conker's Bad Fur Day is an M-rated 3D platformer. It is a game where, where normally you go to a world where you help if you have a farm level, if that's even a common theme, you have a farm level in Conker's Bad Fur Day. But if you're to go into a farm level in any other game, one of your missions would be to round up sheep for a farmer, and you get a collectible for it. No. In Conker's Bad Fur Day, you collect cheese to give to a lactose-intolerant mouse, so that he eventually blows up in a pile of blood and guts, at least as much blood and guts as you could produce on the Nintendo 64. And your reward is just getting to see that cutscene and continuing to move along in the story. Where in another game, you would just obtain a shiny object for beating a bunch of littler enemies in Conker's Bad Fur Day in that same level. You beat up a bunch of little haystacks and find that the giant one is actually a Hey Terminator stack, and now he's trying to kill Conker with evil big lasers. And that's the fun, for me, of Conker's Bad Fur Day. Although I totally see a lot of the flaws in the game, in that, it just can't decide if it wants to be a 3D platformer, if it wants to be a third-person shooter, if it wants to be a first-person shooter. How a lot of the areas are just brutally difficult, particularly in the horror part of the game and the war part of the game. Of course, you're dealing with a Nintendo 64, which only has one analog stick, so shooting controls are just infinitely harder, and that's a big reason why, honestly, if I ever go ahead to play Conker's Bad Fur Day, I'll probably just play it on the live and the live and reloaded version, as opposed to the original N64 version, although I totally understand the argument of I want less censorship on my Nintendo version, which first is just a very weird phrase to say, but I digress. But man, Conker could have been such an amazing series if Microsoft just really and truly let it continue. But alas, we only received Conker's Bad Fur Day, and Rare is back in this weird place. There has Sea of Thieves, which is good. And I want to say Rareware is working on a new sort of project beyond Sea of Thieves, but I can't remember if that's been announced yet, what their potential upcoming games are at this point. But suffice it to say, Rare is... Oh, they're working on Everwild. That's right, that was announced in 2019 for Windows and Series X. But suffice it to say, Rare ain't working on any Banjo or Conker games at the moment, and nor are they working on Donkey Kong 64, which, as I mentioned earlier, was one of the first games I received with my Nintendo 64, and it's because, man, I love Donkey Kong games. I love Donkey Kong Country. Donkey Kong Country 2 and 3 and Returns, and Tropical Freeze is actually probably the game I've played the least, even though it's frequently considered one of the best Donkey Kong Country games, up there with 2. But Donkey Kong 64, on the other hand, ain't that great. Now, I don't want to go too deep into that little rabbit hole here, because I do have a Donkey Kong episode that needs to be recorded yet, but, you know, the long and short of it is Donkey Kong 64 is way too big and bloated, and I really want to like it, but, oh, it's going to take so long to beat it, even just once. And I'm not prepared for that. That's the long and short of it. Donkey Kong 64 is just so stupidly big. As far as other Nintendo 64 games, we have to talk about one's actually kind of obscure, interestingly, probably because it's one of the last Nintendo 64 games, and it only released in North America, although it was re-released in Japan in the Nintendo Puzzle Collection on the GameCube. I'm, of course, talking about Dr. Mario 64, which, I mean, what can I really say about it? It's Dr. Mario, but it has a story mode. I don't know how much I've really talked about Dr. Mario on here. I'm certainly more of a Tetris guy than I am a Dr. Mario person or a Puyo Puyo person. But it's really just the same normal Dr. Mario gameplay, just on the Nintendo 64. You match viruses and pills and you eliminate them, and that's about all you do. But, you know, it has a fun, unique aesthetic, and I can't really say that Dr. Mario 64 is just nothing special because of that. So it's a fun little game. It's got a fun little story. I like how it's focused on, interestingly, not really for it being Dr. Mario 64, it's really more of a Wario Land game that just happens to have Dr. Mario gameplay, because if not all the enemies that you fight in the campaign are just Wario Land enemies, and even then, the final boss is the character Rudy the Clown, which sounds like, who the heck is Rudy the Clown? Well, that's the main bad guy in Wario Land 3. So, and even then, of course, the first bad guy, or the first opponent that you face in Dr. Mario 64 is Wario. So it's just kind of appropriate in that sense that they're all Wario enemies. But it's Dr. Mario 64 is just, it's Dr. Mario, but it's just weird in how it's also like a Wario game, and that's just fun. But like I said, how much can I really talk about Dr. Mario 64? Oh, I need that water. And then again, now we get to the one of the series that I haven't been able to talk about much on here, and that's F-Zero. So F-Zero X is probably, outside of the games that I haven't played at all, if it is not F-Zero X, it's F-Zero Maximum Velocity. That's my least played F-Zero game. Because I've actually played F-Zero on the SNES quite a bit, and I tell you, I really like that game. But I like F-Zero GX better on the GameCube. But both games are so hard. These super fast, futuristic racers. I want a new F-Zero game, man, like so many people, because we haven't had one in, let's see, at least in North America. F-Zero GX came out in 2003. It's been a good 18 years since the last full console F-Zero game, and I just want a new one. I mean, certainly games like Fast Racing Neo and the Wipeout series are fine stand-ins for F-Zero, but I want to see Captain Falcon in his own game again, and I want these really hard, fast, futuristic racing courses to come back in style, because they're really fun. F-Zero X is really fun. I just haven't played it a ton. And honestly, F-Zero X is probably easier than GX, but I would frankly probably much sooner just play F-Zero GX because F-Zero GX looks way better than F-Zero X, although, man, is it a hard game. It's so hard. And you know, it's really not... F-Zero isn't a very complicated series, but I don't know. I like it a lot, and I want to see it come back. And of course, I can't talk about F-Zero GX at all without mentioning F-Zero AX. I have the opportunity, being a good old Wisconsinite, dare I, if I ever go to Madison to their arcade there is an actual F-Zero AX arcade unit, and those are so hard to find, and I could plug in my GameCube memory card and get all the F-Zero AX arcade content in F-Zero GX the way you're meant to do it by going to the arcade. And that would be super cool. Playing F-Zero with a steering wheel instead of with a controller. Oh, I think it'd be really, really fun. I don't know if it's the full, like, if it's just a standard arcade chair unit there, or if it's the full-blown with the top over to look like the Blue Falcon unit, but man, oh man, F-Zero's fun, and I want the opportunity to play it, because like I said, you know, I thought Super Mario Sunshine was too fast of a game for a platformer. F-Zero, it's really fast, and I said it's really hard, but it's not so hard that it's impossible. And I haven't had a ton of opportunity to play F-Zero, and I want to have a reason to play it again. And if all I can do are play F-Zero X or F-Zero GX on my Nintendo Switch Online in one fateful future day, that's what I'll do. Because I just want to play it again. It's been so long since any F-Zero content has come out. I don't know. I still can never... the one thing I don't like about these console retrospectives, or even just retrospectives in general, is I feel like I don't really talk about the game itself because I just don't have enough experience with these games. But man, if I'm not passionate about them, I got that going for me. And now I'm going to a completely different direction, and we're going to talk about Kirby 64, The Crystal Shards. And Kirby is a series that, in general, I'm kind of surprised. I haven't talked a lot about Kirby in this podcast yet. Kirby is a series that I find has really good games and games that are still pretty good, but are just not my preferred style, and Kirby 64 is definitely one of those games. I like Kirby's Dream Land. I think Kirby's Adventure is okay. But I really like Kirby Superstar and Return to Dreamland, and Triple Deluxe is the best Kirby game. Kirby Planet Robobot just didn't jive with me, although it's in the style that I much prefer. But the Kirby games that I find I really don't care for that much are Dreamland 2, Dreamland 3, and Kirby 64 here. And it's not because they're bad games, necessarily. Kirby 64 is still perfectly fine, although I do think it's a shame that the Crystal Shards was still a 2D, even if it's really a 2.5D platformer. I still think it is a bit of a shame that, you know, HAL Laboratory just has never committed to doing a true 3D Kirby game. I find the levels to be just too simple, dang it. It's fun to get to the end. It's interesting trying to solve the puzzles to get the crystal shards along the way. And even then, in Crystal Shards, you have things like the power combinations, where you could have, like, fire and stone to become a volcano, or ice and stone to become a curling stone sort of copy ability. I think those are fun, but the thing that makes Kirby Superstar and these more modern Kirby games way better is that system of having multiple different moves for a copy ability. And Kirby 64 uses that system that Dreamland 2 and Adventure, although I still think Adventure is a little bit more acceptable, just because it was the first copy ability game. Kirby 64 and all these other games that I'm not as big a fan of just have one move for your copy abilities, and that's just plain not very interesting. And it's a shame, because I think it could be interesting. even more interestingly, Kirby 64 is one of the few headlining Nintendo 64 games that only uses the D-pad for movement, which that honestly is just a nice little change of pace, but it's still weird to have a major Kirby game, or to have a major Nintendo 64 game not use the analog stick. But still, I can't pretend like Kirby 64 is this bad game. It's just not the Kirby game for me, you know? And that's fine. I still feel like it'd be interesting to finish it one of these days, though. And now, I'm going to skim over Zelda, because I have a whole Zelda episode that I have planned that I haven't recorded yet, because I'm sick of doing pre-production, but that's a whole side point here. So we have Ocarina of Time in this discussion, Majora's Mask, and The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker. I have Twilight Princess, which is technically a GameCube game, but I think it's really more of a Wii game, if anything, so if I talk about it more, it'll be in the next episode. Plus, I have not even touched Twilight Princess, so I'm not qualified to really talk about it. The only Zelda game that I have beaten is Ocarina of Time. I've come really close to the Link Between Worlds, and I generally prefer 2D Zelda, but I don't want to completely say every opinion I have on Zelda here, because I want to have a whole separate episode about it, but I like 3D Zelda, I prefer 2D Zelda, but I certainly see how The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time was considered this massively revolutionary game for the time, because there's a reason that I went back and actually have beaten this one. Of course, I do want to go back and beat Majora's Mask, but I just haven't found that same sort of motivation for The Wind Waker, or even starting Twilight Princess, or starting Skyward Sword, really. Although, granted, a lot of that probably just comes down to the fact that Majora's Mask and Ocarina of Time I played on the 3DS, which are handheld consoles, which I have way more time to play than home consoles. And the Wii U, of course, is where I've played Wind Waker HD, or started Wind Waker HD, I should say, but I haven't wanted to sit down and play it through, so what can you do? Again, I want to save more of this Zelda discussion for my Zelda-focused episode here. So now we're going to shift gears and talk about Mario Golf. So Mario Golf started on the Nintendo 64. Of course, there's also the Game Boy Color game. But when I think of what Mario Golf and Mario Tennis should be like, I think of 3D Mario Golf. But if you ask me, the Mario Golf series really started on the GameCube with Mario Golf Toadstool Tour. I would say nowadays, even with the Mario Golf Super Rush out, Toadstool Tour is still considered the premier Mario Golf experience. But I don't really have an opinion on that. I think Toadstool Tour is still really good. I still think Super Rush is really good. Honestly, I think those two games, if you saw my first impressions segment in episode 10, they're both really good games in their own right, though I think Mario Golf Super Rush needs more content. But Mario Golf in the Nintendo 64 is dated. And honestly, it's because it has what I consider the worst trapping of 2D golf games, which is that the stupid power bar is so fast. And I can't with it, man. It's so hard to get a fully accurate swing in Mario Golf on the 64. And, it probably would be easier if I had grown up with the game, but I didn't grow up with Mario Golf. And I can't, I have to look at this with what I have. And if I'm going to play Mario Golf, unless the N64 version is my only option, I'm almost guaranteed to pick any other Mario Golf game than the Nintendo 64 game. But look, it's not like Mario Golf isn't important, because, yeah, it was arguably the first Mario sports game. It set up this whole wide side series of Mario Golf, tennis, soccer, strikers, I guess, baseball, all of these other sports, right, that Mario has played. And, it's still a 3-click golf game, and regardless of my feelings on Mario Golf on the 64 in particular, I still like 3-click golf, and I can glean at least a little bit of fun out of it. Plus, if I really need an excuse to play Mario Golf on the N64, this is the only version of Mario Golf with mini golf, and it is a crying shame that no other Mario Golf game has had mini golf in it. So, points to you, Mario Golf 64, for having mini golf in it. I guess I'll have to turn it on sometimes for that, but it's just, man, if it weren't for that darn power meter, I would like it way better. And on top of that, the most important aspect of Toadstool Tour and Advanced Tour, as far as I'm concerned, that make it a far, far better game, is the main addition of having a label on the power meter to show, like, hey, your shot will go here if you hit this exact spot on the power meter. And, this is a 64 and GameCube focused retrospective here, and I can't pretend like Mario Golf Toadstool Tour isn't way better, if only because of that. And just the controls on Toadstool Tour are just so much tighter, and the graphics, of course, are leaps and bounds ahead of Mario Golf 64. And the same holds true for Mario Power Tennis on the GameCube compared to Mario Tennis on the Nintendo 64. Although, if I'm going to be honest, and this is probably a hot take here, I don't really like any Mario Tennis game prior to Mario Tennis Open on the 3DS. Now, granted, Mario Tennis Open was my first Mario Tennis game, but I just feel like I have no idea what I'm doing in Mario Tennis on the 64 or Mario Power Tennis. Now, also, granted, my Mario Power Tennis that I played is the Wii version, not the GameCube version. I very much could like Mario Power Tennis better on the GameCube using actual buttons than using a stupid movements with a Wii remote. But having played Mario Tennis on the 64, I don't know if that's the case. And a lot of that comes down to there's really not a lot of shot types in these classic Mario Tennis games. Mario Tennis Open gave you those chance shots, which I know people don't really care for because it kind of became a match of hit the right button that's this color and symbol to win, which is totally fair. I think that's a fair critique, but at least I feel like I'm doing different kinds of shots, whereas in Mario Tennis and Mario Power Tennis, outside of the power shots, I feel like I'm basically just hitting a ball back and forth. And that's a bit of a shame, because I think, tennis could have been a lot more than that. And in some ways, if I'm going to be totally honest, I actually think Mario Tennis Open is a lot more technical than these classic games that I know people like, but, I would much sooner pop in Mario Tennis Aces than probably any other Mario Tennis game at this point. And, I can at least say that with Mario Golf, I have a good motivation to pop in any one of those games for any particular reason. Mario Tennis just doesn't have that same advantage, and it's a bit of a shame. Oh boy, now we get to this one. Mario Kart 64 is considered possibly the best Mario Kart game, and I can't stand it. Okay, I certainly do not have the nostalgia for Mario Kart 64 that a lot of people have, and Mario Kart 64, I have never been able to play with 4 players, because I only have 2 Nintendo 64 controllers. Well, actually, no, I guess that doesn't matter, because I have Mario Kart 64 on the Wii Virtual Console, and I don't have 4 classic controllers or enough GameCube controllers and classic controllers to play it with 4 players, and I don't have enough people around me who want to play Mario Kart to play 4-player Mario Kart 64. So, I don't have any real desire or ability to play Mario Kart 64 the way that a lot of people did play it, which is in multiplayer. And, Mario Kart 64 really doesn't have that, playing Mario Kart 64 in single player just, to me, demonstrates how flawed of a game it is. the AI is so strong or so dumb, depending on whether you're behind or in front. The items are way out of balance. And then there's the drifting. Oh, the drifting. I hate drifting in Mario Kart 64 because it's all this constant, in Mario Kart DS and beyond, which, again, I will grant Mario Kart DS was my first Mario Kart. So there's probably some nostalgia there, okay? But I generally find the drifting from there on is far, far better. Now, I'm going to talk about Double Dash here in a moment. I actually think the more experience I've had with Double Dash, the more I've come to appreciate its drifting system, though I still don't think it's the best. Mario Kart 64 feels like it has a constant where, like, a lot of... I don't know if I'm using these terms correctly, but in Mario Kart DS, it feels like you have an inside drift, whereas in Mario Kart 64, so, like, to clarify what I mean, it's like I feel like I have a tight going closer into a turn drift, whereas in Mario Kart 64, I feel like I have a constant outside drift in the sense that it's like, I feel like I'm continually driving, like, if I were to make a right turn drift, instead of just kind of tightening the turn more into the right, I'm just shifting way off to the left while I'm slowly turning to the right, and the boost I get doesn't feel that significant, and if I'm unlucky, I'm either going to hit a wall, get stuck in the grass, or I'm going to spin out and then get completely back in the pack. And I just, I really want to like Mario Kart 64, but it's got so much jank in it, and I can't like it. I am so sorry if everybody hates me now because I hate Mario Kart 64, but it's so bad. I cannot. It is by far, I would much rather play Super Mario Kart or Mario Kart Super Circuit before playing Mario Kart 64. It is that low tier for me. But Mario Kart Double Dash on the GameCube, I used to not like it very much because I also thought the drifting wasn't as great. But now I feel like I've at least learned the drifting a little bit better in Double Dash to where I can appreciate the game a little bit more. So, I'm open to giving Mario Kart 64 another chance, considering this evolution I've had with Mario Kart Double Dash, but I don't know, man. I don't know. So, but actually talking about Double Dash, I feel like Mario Kart Double Dash, and actually some of the other Mario sports games I just talked about, are prime candidates for what I meant in the start when I say this is the aesthetic that I associate with the GameCube and the Nintendo 64 that really drew me in. And, well, Double Dash more specifically for the GameCube. When I think of the aesthetic that drew me into the N64 that made it seem like this really interesting console, I think of, like, the 3D renders, like I said, that were used for Super Mario 64, and really for a series that we're going to talk about, it might be the next one, Mario Party. But for me, just the sheer Mario aesthetic of the GameCube era, I think, is encapsulated perfectly in the art for Mario Kart Double Dash. But even then, I can't just say the game is iconic because I think the art looks pretty. I think it's the quintessential GameCube game. And it's not just because Mario Kart, of course, is the best-selling series on most Nintendo systems, although in this case, the GameCube's best-selling game was Super Smash Bros. Melee, so a little bit, I think this is the one time that a Smash game has outsold Mario Kart, though I could be wrong, do not quote me on that. But man, Mario Kart Double Dash, I like the character selection. It's a perfect mix of just iconic Mario characters, and a couple oddballs as far as, like, you have to have some enemies like Koopa Troopa and Koopa Paratroopa. This is the first Mario Kart game to have all unique carts instead of just the pipe frame. Although, I'll be honest, I do like the pipe frame, and I'm glad it returned in Mario Kart 7 and 8, but I digress. Of course, Mario Kart Double Dash is actually the first game to actually 3D model the racers. characters in Mario Kart 64 were all sprites, for better or worse. And I just, I don't know. Mario Kart Double Dash is a game I like because I feel like it's the culmination of the whole Mario aesthetic on the GameCube. It has those sunshiny levels. Everything has eyes, including the trees. The character models are just jagged enough to feel kind of old techy, but not to the point. Not, certainly, they look way better than the Mario Kart DS models, which I guess is to be expected comparing a home console to a handheld video game system. But I like I said, the unique carts. I like how every character has a cart that they can call their own. I actually kind of like the track selection in the game quite a bit. Luigi's Circuit, of course, is really interesting for just simply being a track that literally intersects. Like, the middle is just one giant piece of road, but you're technically supposed to go on it one way and come back on it in the opposite direction. I like tracks like Mushroom Bridge. I like, Wario Coliseum is a great track. If I'm going to be honest, though, one of people's most favorite Double Dash tracks is probably one that I can't stand anymore, which is Baby Park. I've played that track to death. It's not that interesting anymore. As far as other aspects, of course, I brought up Mario Kart Double Dash is one of the only LAN play games where you can connect up to, is it 8 or 16 GameCubes? Either way, you can have 16 players, which is just insane to me. I've never experienced Mario Kart Double Dash LAN play, but I think it would be absolutely fascinating. It's fun just to have two characters on one cart, although I've never really done the cooperative play. I would think that's super boring, having essentially one player be the racer and the other player just be responsible for the items. I like being able to have two items at once, although, actually, one aspect I don't like about the item system is having to hold on to the item. Certainly, I think it's more strategic to have to, like, literally throw a banana peel behind you just as a shell is coming. And, of course, that's kind of somewhat why it returned in Mario Kart 8, but not exactly. But it's fun. Mario Kart Double Dash is by far the most unique Mario Kart, and I can't fault it for being unique. If anything, it thrives in its uniqueness. Now we get to Mario Party. There are 5 games that I could talk about. If I had Mario Party 6 and 7, there will be 7 games to talk about here. If I'm going to be honest, I really don't want to talk about a lot of these. I only have Mario Parties 2, 4, and 5, because only 2 was released on the Wii Virtual Console, so that's the only one I picked up. Mario Party's Mario Party. I would rather do a full-blown segment in a different episode where I can just talk about my experiences with Mario Party, but suffice it to say, I find myself a lot more lenient on Mario Party than others are. Certainly, I have my preferred games. Mario Party DS is best Mario Party, period. No questions, no, you're not gonna argue with me otherwise that Mario Party 3 is better than DS. I have that nostalgia goggle on for Mario Party DS. But I have a lot of, I think Mario Party is just a genius idea. It's a Mario board game with little mini games to determine coins. What doesn't sound fun about that? Mario Parties 9 and 10, that's what doesn't sound fun about it, because they don't use the same formula. But I totally, at the same time, understand the argument that a lot of people had that, we have 2 consoles with 7 Mario Parties, and by the time Mario Party 8 came out on the Wii, yeah, of course there was going to be some fatigue in the series when you have 8 games released over 10 years in one series. Not too dissimilar from what happened with, say, Mega Man, and how that game series kind of became stale just by having so many games and so many side series. So I don't know. I want to play more Mario Party. If I had the time, I would love to play it more often. But honestly, I don't know how much I would enjoy games post Mario Party 8. I think the Hudson Soft Mario Parties are like by far the best ones. Not that the ND Cube ones are bad, but they're just, they're just Mario Parties 9 and 10 speak for themselves of being not that great. The 3DS Mario Parties are kind of weak. And while I have great hopes for Mario Party Superstars, I don't know if it's going to be a truly, truly amazing Mario Party game. But, here's hoping. And let's see, what other Nintendo 64 and, let's see, GameCube games do you have to talk about? Let's do a brief Pac-Man tangent. For whatever reason, Pac-Man just had a humongous resurgence on the in the 5th and 6th generations. Whether you're talking about Pac-Man Maze Madness, which is just, I don't know. I think Nitro Rad's review of the game is really the one review that does the game true, full-blown justice. I've hardly played it. I've basically played the first level. I don't have a ton of nostalgia for it, but yeah, it's fun having a Miss Pac-Man focused game. And again, the art from Miss Pac-Man as well as Pac-Man World 2 and 3, the GameCube, well, I played those two on the PlayStation 2, actually. I played Maze Madness on the 64. These games have the aesthetic that, again, just scream 5th and 6th generation to me, and I love it for that. Of course, people talk about, I think people make jokes that, we're kind of legally obligated to force conversations about Pac-Man World 2 to you, because it's considered a really good game. And it's probably the Pac-Man World game that I'm the furthest in. I actually don't think Pac-Man World 3 in particular is as weak as some folks think it is. I certainly wouldn't call it I would probably jump for Pac-Man World 2 first, out of all of the Pac-Man games on the GameCube. No surprise there. But I think it's, again, kind of like how Banjo-Kazooie was the mascot 3D platformer of the 5th generation. I think Pac-Man World was one of the, the 6th generation was really the first transition into the, gritty, darker games. But there was still a lot of mascot platformers in the 6th generation, and Pac-Man World just so happened to be one of those. And that it makes me happy. Though Pac-Man World 2, of course, is a real big pain to 100%. And again, I recommend Nitro Rad's series on the Pac-Man 5th and 6th generation series to get an idea of that. One of the only role-playing games in the Nintendo 64 was Paper Mario. Now, I barely played Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door, but much like Super Smash Brothers, that's the only one or Melee, I should say. I don't own The Thousand Year Door. I am missing two games that are considered the best in their respective series, and they both just happen to be for the GameCube. But, I don't love RPGs. I would much rather play Mario and Luigi than play Paper Mario, honestly. And if I remember correctly, I'm barely in the desert area in Paper Mario. I haven't really had the time or desire to want to sit down and beat it, which is a bit of a shame, though, because because Paper Mario is considered, of course, to be a really, really good side series, and even then, that desire doesn't just hold true with Paper Mario 64 or even wanting to pick up the Thousand Year Door, especially for $130. Ridiculous. I'm not going to pay that much for one video game, especially Paper Mario that I don't know if I'm going to love as much as people really, 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 really like it. That mindset just also happens to hold true for Color Splash and the Origami King. Although I have beaten a couple Paper Mario games, just Super Paper Mario and, why can I think of the name? Paper Mario Sticker Star. So we're almost done here with the Nintendo 64 only, portion of this. So let's talk about Star Fox a little bit. I talked about Star Fox briefly, I think, in the SNES episode, since, of course, Star Fox and Star Fox 2 are two pretty important Super Nintendo games. But I think Star Fox 64 is really where the series got its stride. And there's a reason it's considered really the only true iconic Star Fox game. Not that the other ones aren't good or aren't iconic for their own reasons, but it's the only game in the series that I find is truly popular. Now, of course, I played Star Fox 64 3D on the 3DS, and certainly that has a lot to do with why I much prefer it, but I don't get to play a lot of rail shooters, and Star Fox is one of the few series that is a rail shooter that I like. And, you know, it is levels like Corneria and, oh goodness, I am blanking on a lot of the levels in Star Fox 64. God, other than Corneria, just those on-rails levels that are simple pick up and play, those are the kind of game levels that I like in Star Fox. Some of the on-range levels are okay. Even the Landmaster levels aren't really my favorite. Like, there's that one where where you're going up against a train with the Landmaster. That is an interesting level, not a very fun level. But again, it's still fun. If anything, my enjoyment of Star Fox 64 just kind of tells me I wish I had more rail shooters to play, and maybe that means I should pick up something like Sin and Punishment, which also happens to be on the Nintendo 64. So it's worth a try. I haven't. Again, I for as much as I like video games, I don't make a ton of time for them all. Last S-related game on the Nintendo 64 that I'm going to talk about, and of course, that is Super Smash Bros. The original Smash Bros., to me, is a relic. I have no real reason to want to go back to it, other than just to be like, I want to play the first Smash, see what it's like. But nowadays, it's just like, just play Ultimate. If this was 5 years ago, just play Smash for 3DS or Wii U. Just play basically any other game than this. And, you know, I have to respect the original Smash Brothers for being such an amazing creation. There's a reason why every time there's been a new Smash character announced, I cover it on this show. And it's because, you know, Super Smash Brothers to me, it's not the... It isn't the best video game series ever, right? But it's just simple fun, and anyone can pick it up and enjoy it. And that's all you really need out of a game. And, you know, Smash Brothers is simple. Hit opponents, increase their percentage, knock them off the stage, gain a point for it, or make them lose a life, and you win. It combines the best aspects of Super Mario Brothers and having a platforming with fighting games, and that you get to smack people. You get to smack Donkey Kong. You get to smack Link. You get to smack around all these characters. And it's just chaotic, frenetic fun. And I can't think of a better party game, other than maybe Mario Kart, than Super Smash Brothers. And I have to respect Smash on the 64 for it. Smash 64, honestly, is probably the Nintendo 64 game I've played the most, if I'm going to be honest. And there's a reason for it. It's fun. That's really the main thesis of a lot of these games here that I'm talking about, which is just that they're fun, you know? They're very flawed. There's a lot of reasons why I don't go back to them often, because they're older games and they're flawed, but, you know, they're still fun. As much as I make it sound like I hate a lot of these games, although I really don't like Mario Kart 64, they're still just, they're plain fun. I will admit I need to do some adjustment to older games, and that's my own personal character flaw. But you know what? That's a major reason why I would want to do something like stream games, because, yeah, then I'll go back and play them. Even including games like Wave Race 64, which I've hardly played, but it's a game I want to play. I own it. I want to play it. I just don't have the desire to sit down and play it. But if I say, like, I'm going to play Wave Race 64 on stream, for example, I'm going to play Wave Race 64 for a little bit and really and truly learn what the game is like. Okay, Last N64 game, then the rest here on out are all GameCube games. Yoshi's Story. What a weird game. Yoshi's Story should be an amazing game, because it should just be a Yoshi game, but it's such a weird Yoshi game. You know, in Yoshi's Island, you want to get to the end of the level and bring Baby Mario along with you. In Yoshi's Story, there is no Baby Mario. You just need to eat, what? Is it 30 fruits? Or it's just, you need, oh yes, it's 30 fruits. You need to eat 30 fruits in a level, and then you beat the level. But because of that, the game is very easy, because you find fruit all over the place. Of course, you know, in theory, what you want to do is really eat 30 of the same piece of fruit, because they give you bonuses for doing that, but it really isn't all that interesting, if I'm going to be honest. Yoshi's Story is just a really easy game. And it's kind of sad, because I want to say it's more than that, but alas, that's all really the commentary I have for it. I haven't played it a ton. I've played a handful of Yoshi's Story levels. I think it's fun, but I would much rather play standard Yoshi's Island, Yoshi's Woolly World, even Crafted World, and I don't think Crafted World is that great either. I find it a little more in line with Yoshi's Story in that it's just not a super amazingly inspiring game. But alas. Now, as far as GameCube games I have remaining, I have, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I guess 7 if you want to include Pikmin 2 here. Now, let's just kind of skip these. I have Midway Arcade Treasures. That was a game I played on the PS2 as well as Namco Museum 50th Anniversary, but what all can I really say about them? The GameCube was home to a lot of compilations. There was those two. Of course, there are 2 other Midway Arcade Treasures games. There were actually a couple other Namco museums, at least one for sure. And there were there were some Intellivision compilations, Sega compilations, Capcom, Mega Man, Street Fighter, all sorts of different compilations in this 6th generation. So if you want an era for just, I want to have as many games on one little place as possible, you go to the 6th gen consoles. You go to your GameCubes, your Xboxes, your PS2s, because you'll find a ton of game compilations on there. But, you know, what can I say about arcade games, especially when there's a gazillion of them on them to cover? You know, like Namco Museum 50th Anniversary, I played on the PS2 a bunch. It has Pac-Man. It's Pac-Man. What all can I say about it? Pac-Man's great, but I don't have a ton of commentary. Luigi's Mansion, one of the launch titles for the GameCube, and such an interesting game. If I'm going to be honest, when I was a little kid, just because it's ghosts and spooky, it was scary when I was a little boy. But I'm a grown man now, and of course it's just a cartoony sort of game, and it's fine. But if I'm going to be honest, people have a lot of nostalgia for Luigi's Mansion. I don't. And it comes down to one major flaw, that the 3DS port actually quite improved, though I still don't think, the GameCube version is by far the better version. I have such a hard time capturing ghosts in this GameCube game. Luigi's Mansion, it's a pretty simple premise. It's a haunted mansion. Mario is captured by King Boo. Luigi's got to save him by capturing a bunch of portrait ghosts and a bunch of regular ghosts along the way. Of course, the portrait ghosts are basically just your bosses. They're special little characters with unique personalities. But where Luigi's Mansion 1 falters is you have to shine your flashlight at the ghost, right? But I'll just find myself walking around. I got my flashlight on me. I flash it at the ghost. It freezes. But because I'm not expecting to hit the ghost, I'm not ready to suck it in right away. And fortunately, Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon and Luigi's Mansion 3 on the 3DS and Switch, respectively, just improve this thanks to the strobe bulb. Like, just such a brilliant change, because now it's like, okay, I see ghosts. I'm preparing to stun ghosts. Ghosts stay stunned for longer. And now I can suck them up with my poltergust. And that's all I needed. I think Luigi's Mansion on the GameCube could be really fun if it just weren't for that one little slight game-breaking aspect for me. But otherwise, I mean, it's just a fun game. Honestly, Luigi's Mansion, as far as if it isn't Mario Golf Toadstool Tour or Mario Party 4 or 5, because I don't have 6 or 7, just a reminder, Luigi's Mansion might be my favorite GameCube game. It's really up there. It's a little simple game, and I really like the sequels too. Although I think, Luigi's Mansion, the game on the GameCube game, has a special little place, and it's important for a reason. Mario Superstar Baseball. Mario Super Sluggers is way better. People have a lot of nostalgia for Mario Superstar Baseball. I played Super Sluggers first on the Wii, so of course I have that nostalgia there for myself. But I just, it's baseball with Mario characters. It's kind of sort of why all the Mario sports games work already. It's just a Mario-fied version of baseball, and it's fun. I don't think baseball works as well on the GameCube, and it's probably just because a lot of the timing is very different. I don't know. I prefer Super Sluggers, bottom line. But, it's baseball. Do I really need to explain baseball here? 9 innings, get a better score. It's that simple. Pikmin and Pikmin 2. I like Pikmin 1 the second most. I think Pikmin 3 is far, 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 far superior because it does all of the things that I would want, and it improves all of the flaws on the original Pikmin game. So Pikmin 1, you only have one captain. You have 3 types of Pikmin: red, blue, and yellow. Reds are immune to fire, and they damage enemies with 1.5 times the attack power. In Pikmin 1, only yellow Pikmin can pick up bomb rocks, and they can be thrown higher. They're very situational, so they're not really all that useful. And then blue Pikmin can walk around in water, and they will help rescue drowning Pikmin, but that I find very situational as well. I like Pikmin 1, except for the stupid time limit. I hear it's very easy. I probably could get it done if I really wanted to, but I hate time limits. I hate time limits. That's one of the aspects I don't love about Majora's Mask. It's still a good game, but I hate that pressure. And Pikmin 2 does away with it, and it's way better for it, but that game is just so bloated with so much stuff and dungeons and a ton of treasure and super stupid hard enemies. And Pikmin 3, I think, is just it goes right in the middle. It's not bloated with fruits you have to collect. There's no stupid dungeons. The enemies are, like, a pretty okay level of difficulty. Did I mention there's no time limit? That's really the big thing for me. There's kind of a self-imposed time limit. Your time limit is how much juice you collect. And that I like. I don't like limiting myself to, I have to beat this game in 30 in-game days or I lose. Or I get a middling ending if I only get the necessary ship parts. And still, actually, I think I said this in my Wii U Legacy segment. So I have Pikmin 1 on the GameCube, I have Pikmin 2 on the Wii, and then I have Pikmin 3 on Wii U and Switch. But I just strongly wish I had the new Play Control Wii version of Pikmin, because Pikmin is one of the only video game series that is improved by the Wii Remote, for sure. And it's one of the reasons why I find Pikmin 3 Deluxe to be not quite as strong of a game, because being able to point exactly where you want to throw your Pikmin is so useful. But on 3 Deluxe, you use gyro, and it gets way out of sync, and then in Pikmin 1, you have to rely on the cursor with your control stick, and that's how you move, and I don't like it. I don't like it. I want my free Roman pointer with my Wii Remote, please. Okay. We have one other little bit of games that I have already played on the GameCube. I have Crash, Tag Team Racing, and Wrath of Cortex. I haven't popped them in, but, I own them. I have 3 Sonic games on the GameCube: Sonic Adventure DX, Sonic Adventure 2 Battle, and the Sonic Gems collection. I talked about all of those in the Sonic episode. I haven't touched Sonic Adventure 2 Battle. I've hardly touched Sonic Adventure DX. I think it is very similar to Super Mario 64 in that the controls are very flawed and slippy, and the aesthetic is kind of weak in that it feels like very much the first 3D Sonic game, like the first true 3D Sonic game. And it's a shame, because it could be a lot better. And then the Sonic Gems collection, it's another compilation game, so I talk about all the games that I've played on that in the Sonic episode. So if you want to hear my thoughts on that, I would recommend going there. But those are all of my personal experiences with the Nintendo 64 and the Nintendo GameCube. So I think that we're ready to close out this episode just shy of 2 hours. I don't know if this really was super coherent or if it was decent enough improv, but I just finally wanted to get this episode under the belt, get another one done, and this one really didn't require much of any pre-production other than knowing, here are all the games I own, let me kind of disperse my thoughts and feelings on them in a hopefully somewhat coherent way. So with all of that said, please, for this episode of the Creative Outlet Podcast, do your typical sorts of engagement things, folks. Please like. If you want to subscribe to the YouTube channel, you're free to do that. Send in a voice message at anchor.fm/THECOP. That's the main page. There's a message button on there. Yeah, and otherwise, please just share around the show if you can. Be much appreciated. Otherwise, that is all I have to say for today. This is Brandon Pudwill of the Creative Outlet Podcast, signing out. Thank you very much, folks.